Hi, this is Kevin C. Mason from Jack Monkey Games, and this is a story about people who tell stories. Now, before we get started, I got a new microphone, so I would love some feedback, whether or not you can hear this better or worse, or, hey, what's this thing that you're waving around in front of your face? That kind of thing. Personally, I just don't have a stand for it, and the range isn't all that good from what I can tell. So, still trying to figure this out, but I figured that the story is more important. Now, if you like this story, click like, click subscribe, leave a comment, or even more importantly, share it with a friend. Because that's how I know that you like it, and I'll make more. So, before we get going, if you're thinking that this is going to be a great cautionary tale to save your friends from the dangers of role-playing games, think again. In 30 years of playing, and I mean I'm playing a lot, I've only encountered one person that was like this, and he was only mostly harmless. So, with that said, it was 1992. I was living in my best friend's Mike's house with his parents and two poodles. These toy poodles were, one was getting kind of old and the other one was like super hyper to the point where Jack Russells are like, girl, you need to relax. She was just the most hyper thing I had ever met. We're talking all the time. Wanted to play, wanted to do this, wanted to do that. Never say the word walk. That was bad. So, now because at the time I was still figuring out what my work ethic was, we did just a lot of gaming. That's all we really did. So, Mondays, game night. Tuesdays, game night. Wednesdays, well, you kind of get the hint. Well, with running that much 2nd edition Shadowrun, after a while I was getting tired of being a GM. So Mike decided he was going to invite over a new player. Now, with the long weekend coming up and his parents going off for a while, this meant we could have a larger game night because it wouldn't interfere with them. So we invited George and a few other people. Well, only George showed up. That's what we get for short notice. That and everyone else was doing things like going to parties. Well, let me set the stage. So, where we would game was in his front room. Not around the table, but in the front room. Couches, and then the GM. I usually pace when I'm a GM, so I didn't sit down. But George, the new GM, set up with his GM screen, the whole works, up on the end of the table, and then sat on the ground. From there, he ran us through a game that could only be described as railroading with a side of monologue and issues. He was a psychology student's wet dream. The guy had issues. In fact, he railroaded so much that my dice were actually gathering dust. It was that bad. It just was not a fun experience whatsoever. And the game was kind of creepy. Not in the, ooh, scary kind of creepy, but dude, you've got issues kind of creepy. We're talking the kind of creepy, you don't let your friends hang out with this kind of person kind of creepy. Yeah. You don't let your sister hang out with this person. You don't let your daughter hang out with this person. He was creepy. So, at that point, after the 3 hours of listening to him talk and say what happened to us, and we'd roll the dice, and he would ignore what the dice said and said it had nothing to do with the plot, and therefore it came out like this. Mike and I had both agreed silently to each other that tonight never happened as far as our characters were concerned, and we would just weather the storm and let him leave. That said, we were, at the end of every game, Mike and I would go through a part where we would discuss the finer points of the game. Now in Shadowrun 2nd Edition, being the fact that Mike was just at the point of creating a new mage, we were talking about elementals. And we were talking about, the various game mechanics and whether or not it used drain or your wisdom to resist drain. We were talking about how much Nuyen it would cost to get the materials, stuff like that, game stuff. And this is when it happened. George looks up and says, "I can summon an elemental." Mike and I, scratching our head, thought had waited that storm and that the game was over. We were concerned that it was still going. However, no. The game had ended. He wasn't talking about a character saying he could summon an elemental. George was saying he could summon an elemental. This raised an eyebrow or two. From here, Mike, in his infinite wisdom and sarcasm, said, "Yeah, I'd love to see that. Thanks, Mike. Been telling this story for 20 years because of that." So, from there, what happened is that George gave us a very precise list of the materials he would need to summon an elemental. Now, I'm not too worried about him summoning an elemental. Not too concerned about that at all. I'm more worried about damage it may cause to the rest of the house. After all, he wanted incense, candles, and stuff that was somewhat flammable. I was wondering whether or not it was an air elemental or the fire department he was actually trying to summon. So he gave us the precise list, and he said, I'm using the word precise and stressing that because he was very adamant that we had to get the right materials. 6 candles, chalk, some cardboard, and, most importantly, 5 pieces of coned incense. Well, no chalk, and we only had 4 pieces of coned incense, which apparently in George speak, precise means close enough, because he used a ballpoint pen to draw the magic circle on the cardboard, which I'm now watching somewhat concerned. Not because he would summon an elemental, but I'm wondering whether or not he's going to burn the house down. From here, he lit the candles and the incense. From here, he lit the incense and he placed the incense, not in the 4 corners like I was expecting, but he put 1 piece at each point of the pentagram that he had drawn, and it kind of left it off center, as from an artist standpoint, it looked kind of crappy. In fact, his lines weren't even straight. Well, from there, he began to mutter. Sounded kind of like row, row, row your boat, which at this point, I'm getting annoyed. The dogs, who had just now finished their snack, their bone that Mike had given them earlier to keep them calm during the game, was gone. So now, Brandy is now investigating of what is going on. Well, from there, George started waving his hand through the smoke while he was muttering, and as he would do that, this would cause little tornadoes. Now, before you start wondering whether or not that is a mystic phenomena, anyone who smokes, which, by the way, Mike, who smoked a pack a day, was very familiar with. This is what happens anytime you wave your hand through smoke. It causes turbulence. Mike, with his amazing sense of comedy and sarcasm, took a long drag from his cigarette, waved his hand, creating these little eddies, these little tornadoes, and said, "Look, I can do it too." The fact that we were able to debunk this summoning of elementals in front of George instantaneously really annoyed him. So from there, he was looking at the dog, which was now starting to get really, really hyper as she was running back and forth. He stops the dog and says, "Be still." Now, from the poodle's point of view, we have someone who's paying attention to it for the first time in forever. which was actually about 20 minutes. And now, this means that you should go really hyper. I mean, the dog vibrates in its sleep. Okay, of course it's going to go hyper. But now, be calm. Relax. He starts doing this, which I saw on Crocodile Dundee on, like, the movie channel not too long ago. So I'm thinking, really, dude? I'm not impressed. Now this looked like I have a treat to the dog, which made it go, what? Hyper. From there, he would grab the muzzle of the dog, which is now physical contact, okay? This is now wrestling time. The dog has now really, really excited. And he puts his forehead up against the dog and says, be calm. Upon letting go of the dog, I didn't realize that dogs could actually break the sound barrier. This little yap machine had run down the hallway, run back, and started doing laps around the room. Round and around and around and around. Knocking papers, dice, soda everywhere. This dog is running sideways around the walls. It is freaking the hell out. Okay, I have never seen the dog this freaked out. Okay, if this guy could actually cast a spell, he rolled a 1. To impress me, he also rolled a 1. So now this dog is freaking out. It's going through the smoke, it's going through the candles, it's knocking everything over. Needless to say, through all of this, the only thing this guy was able to summon was 2 annoyed roommates and a half-crazed dog.